My name is Garrett Rhodes. I'd like to invite you, or welcome to, the Town Hall Budget meeting. Just a couple of issues. Before we get started, I'll be moderating tonight. There probably won't be too much use for that, which is good. If you have a cell phone, if you could turn it off or set it to stun, that would be helpful. And the purpose of tonight's meeting is to solicit ideas, suggestions, and thoughts from you, the public, about anything that concerns you regarding the school district budget, any ideas you might have on how we can trim some money out of that budget, and that sort of thing. Understand that for certain legal reasons, there are some bits of information that Mrs. Donchez and Mr. Stoltz may not be able to divulge. So if you ask a pointed question and they're not able to answer it, understand that that's for legal reasons, that they're not allowed to divulge that. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We do have Board Member Lynn Donchez and Board Member Julian Stoltz from the East Penn School District School Board. Who would like to start with the first thought, idea, or suggestion? Nobody has any ideas? Not everyone at once. Yeah. Gio, you have anything?
I just wanted to hear from the school board directors any ideas that they had, that they may have seen.
First, I'd like to say thank you for coming out as well. I always admired some other local representatives who would have these type of meetings and go to restaurants and say hello and kind of just sit down and say, you know, what's on your mind, and I always enjoyed that, so it's nice to have the opportunity. What have I seen? I see a lot of concern as I was campaigning, listening to a lot of people. I spoke to about 1,000 people, and I just did listen, and people asked why the taxes continue to go up and where the resources are going. So those are my big two questions, and now that I'm on the board, I try to find out as much information as I can in order to look into those questions. So I guess I'll start there and then you can ask me.
I've been on the board for the last, 5 years now. Apparently I'm suffering from a little bit of Stockholm syndrome because I decided to run for re-election last year, and I was honored with the votes of the district. And Ms. Donchez and I are working with some concerned citizens, trying to find some areas of the budget we can cut. Obviously, we're a little bit limited in what we can touch because a lot of the contracts are set for the next couple of years, including the teacher's contract, which was just extended. They did take a 1-year freeze, but it would have been nice if they had extended that to 2 years, which I said earlier this year. Again, as I said, the salary and benefits are contracted in, so it limits what we can do to an extent, but that's why we came out and we're hoping for some citizen input on some other areas that they thought we might be able to save money, or even areas that they were concerned that weren't adequately funded. We're open to any suggestions at all.
Areas that you found so far that maybe would be very important interests going forward?
There is one thing that and it's been brought up before, it's not something that I totally discovered on my own, that at the end of a budget year there is an ending fund balance, and then the beginning year, the next year, the beginning fund balance is often between $1 million and $2 million. So one of the things I need to understand is why that discrepancy. So that's one of the things that I'm looking at.
Mr. Slozer?
Yeah, again, a little confusion, and maybe it's terminology. I know Mr. Ballard and I've had discussions of this at public meetings before. You said there's a fund balance. Is that different than the reserves that they hold? Okay, so the fund balance you're talking about is excess money of the budget that wasn't spent at the end of the budget year. Is that what you mean? Thank you.
Mr. Bacher, you have a comment?
Yeah, I think when the budget is put together, there was a reserve for unanticipated funds. At the end of the year, if that reserve is not spent and it requires board approval to spend it, that unspent is no longer reserved at the end of the year because there's no more year. So that becomes the ending fund balance. So I think there's even a line on the budget that says ending fund balance if reserve is not spent, is the terminology I've seen on the budgets.
Now I'm going to ask you, now,
I mean, I'm just saying what I believe, and if you look at the budgets on the front sheet, it does say next to ending fund balance, it says if the reserve is not spent.
So, are you saying that at the end of the year, then the monies that aren't spent in the budget, as well as reserves,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
are then rolled into fund balance? Is that what you're saying?
Can you address the?
Yeah, we're having a conversation back here, and it should be up there.
I mean, I'll be happy to include Mr. Bacher in the answers to the question, but we do need to address
I
the
mean,
question.
it's my understanding, yes, that the fund balance is everything that's not spent during the year. And so, in response to Ms. Donchez's question, I believe, the district is fiscally conservative and balances budgets conservatively, and as a result, they often do not spend all the money they budget to spend, and that savings goes into the fund balance, and that's why the fund balance is typically larger, because the school district doesn't spend all the money it budgets to spend.
Gio?
I have a question. You mentioned a dollar amount for the fund balance. When I was looking at the preliminary budget online, it looked like last year's fund balance was in the magnitude of $8 to $10 million at the end of the year. Does that seem about correct?
The actual?
The remaining fund balance, the actual?
The actual 2/10/11
Yes.
was 11,800,000.
11 million
Yeah.
is what was left over.
Right.
Okay.
And then the beginning fund balance, which was budgeted for 2011-12, was 8,800,000. So just say 3 million. It's almost a $3 million difference.
Do you know what that difference might be? Why the beginning balance and the end balance aren't the same amount?
Actually, that's a question I was going to ask
Right.
at Monday night's board
Okay.
meeting.
Fair enough. One other question I have, based on something you said earlier, the salaries and benefits were something that were negotiated so they couldn't be touched. About approximately what percent of the budget does the salary and benefits account for?
It's about a little over 60%.
I'm sorry?
A little over 60%.
60?
And then on top of that, we have things like debt payment, which is about $15 million. Busing, which is another $6 million if memory serves. So we have to watch what we're cutting here, because there's a lot that's either mandated or locked in by contract.
Yes, Mr. Donchez?
Do you know what's mandated, contracted, discretionary? Is there a way to find that out?
question?
It is a question that I have asked before, but I guess it's pretty complicated to come up with an answer from what I've been told. I'm trying to myself determine as best as I can what those might be. But I do know that we often talk about, or the board as a whole talks about, the mandated costs and how much they cost. So in order to talk about them, I would think one would know pretty closely how much they do cost us. So I think it's still something that we have to continue to investigate.
Something else that needs to be taken into account, and remember this is an election year, so make sure to ask all of your candidates for state legislature and so on about this. The state actually has the constitutional duty to provide a thorough and efficient system of education. Apparently they think that that means shoving it off to the school boards to create the taxation method for that. And of course that's really just so the state legislature can play this little game with the school boards, and they can say, well, we're not the ones raising taxes, the school boards are raising your taxes. Well, very often the school districts are raising taxes because they feel they're not getting adequate funding from the state. The state should be the ones actually providing all the funding for public education. Yeah, Gio?
Well, isn't it true that state and federal contributions actually went up this year?
Yes, according to the budget book that I have in front of me, state sources went up by a little over $1 million, and federal sources went up by a little over 200,000.
Are you saying the budgeted?
Yes.
John?
Is that for our school or is that in the state?
That's for our school.
Okay.
What really needs to be done, in my opinion, and Lynn, if you have a different one, please share, that's all right. We need to get rid of property taxes, and we need to replace it with a funding source that's going to be adequate to fund public education. Be it a property tax elimination through state sales tax increase. I would probably even be willing to accept an increase in earned income tax. You have a constitutional right to be secure in your property, and as long as you're paying property taxes, you're not secure in your property. You're essentially paying rent to the government, and if you don't pay that rent, you're going to lose your home. The sheriff's going to come and kick you out and sell it at a sheriff's sale. To that end, a few bills have been introduced. Most recently is 1776, which certain incumbents are now suddenly jumping on board with because they have a primary challenge on Tuesday, including in northern Lehigh County. State Senator Dave Argall has just jumped on and is leading the charge in the Senate after being in House leadership previously and doing nothing about this problem. It's amazing what little political pressure will do to some of these people. And that would be my suggestion of a state sales tax, possibly in combination with an earned income tax. I would also like to see school districts given the power to levy impact fees on developers. That would give us a little breathing room, and I think people would rather pay an increase on their home the first time they buy it rather than pay property taxes every year in addition to their mortgage, you know, for the next 15 to 30 years.
Ken?
Given your statement that the state is not funding its responsibility for the schools and that local districts are having to levy property taxes, do you have any concerns that were they to take away the property tax and all the money would have to come from the state, would you have any concern that the state might still not fund the schools adequately and there would be no way to provide for an education net for our kids in our community?
Well, that's always the concern. And I would need to see the formula or whatever method they use to determine how we're going to get funding before jumping on board with any plan. But they need to do something because the funding method we have now isn't working. And it's not working for us, it's not working for them, and it's really not working for the taxpayers. I would like to see how they would handle it. I would like to see school boards still allowed to levy property taxes on, say, secondary homes, not necessarily your primary home, but a secondary property that you might own, and that would give us a little flexibility at least.
Otto, do you have a comment?
Well, I had several, but the taxing structure that you just described, I believe, has the benefit, though, of broadening out so that more people are actually paying the burden of the taxation as opposed to what is being done right now. Is that
Yeah, I heard David Baldinger, who's the head of this coalition and actually a pretty good friend of mine discussing this bill, although I haven't had time to study that bill in detail yet. And he brought up the point that it would even bring people into the tax system like, oh, say, drug lords who aren't paying property taxes, that's for certain. They're not really paying earned income tax to any extent because it's all under the table. You don't tax income on drugs, but everybody pays sales tax and everybody buys. You know, I like what Jim Cox said. He's the prime sponsor of the bill. You know, I like 99-cent peanut M&Ms just as much as the next guy. But if I've got to pay $1.07, by God, I'm willing to do it so I don't have to pay property taxes.
Gio, you had a comment?
Well, it seems to me that there's two sides to this coin, though. Where the revenue is coming from is one side, and the spending is the other side. So if we just shift the revenue source somewhere else, but the spending still continues, I'll still see a tax increase every year. It just might be an income tax increase of a small amount instead of a property tax increase. So do you think that the spending is also an issue here in this situation?
Spending is absolutely an issue, and salaries and contracts are the biggest issue, salary and benefits. We have to switch to a defined contribution instead of a defined benefit plan at the state, and I think all levels of government are going to have to switch to this. It's not going to be optional with the pension bomb hitting us, and I'm sure the state legislature will do what they always do, which is devise some small adjustment or some small fix so that it pushes it down the road a couple of years until they've retired or moved on to a different elected office, and it's just not going to affect them anymore. That's why I said it's an election year. Make sure you question your legislative candidates. Yes, John?
On the line of the earned income tax thing and everything, along with the hockey arena in Allentown, I'm totally against this kind of a thing. There's way too much government involvement in private sector things. And now there's EIT, we're already worried about it. They're being sued. I don't even personally think it's constitutional myself. But, all right, we switch it off to, you know, this is how things keep growing. Oh, there's going to be an EIT tax. Well, now they'll get more for a special interest thing that's going to take it away from maybe what it should be used for. So, what do you think of stuff like that?
And with the state collecting funds, we're going to have to be sure that the state doesn't do with, assuming this passes, that the state doesn't do with the collected state sales tax and earned income tax what the federal government did with Social Security, which is go and spend it on something else. There needs to be an accountability program to make sure that that money is put, and I hate to use this phrase, but it is what it is, in a lockbox that's going to go towards property tax elimination, and it's got to go towards funding education in an adequate and fair fashion. On the other hand, it's also up to the school districts to negotiate contracts with all of our collective bargaining units, and I've been very consistent on this anytime I've spoken about it, in a method that's fair with the taxpayers. Next time we negotiate a contract, I hope to still be a part of the board, and I would like to take part in that, particularly with our teachers union, because we cannot have another contract that grants an average of a 4.9% pay increase on a yearly basis. Even with an increase in what they're paying for their medical benefits, that's not enough. The average taxpayer has gotten no pay increase in the last 4, 5 years and beyond. They weren't getting it when that contract passed, but they're getting a property tax increase every year to pay for it. And it's got to stop. Yes, John?
Another thing would be thorough and efficient schooling. Is that defined? Is there any basis on this? And, I mean, that's the crux of the whole thing. What's thorough and efficient? Who decides that? We're paying for it. I mean, kids are graduating. I know people down in Philadelphia that teach in schools that their kids are graduating with 5th grade levels of reading and math abilities. Now, is that thorough and efficient, and we're allowing that?
Sorry, I didn't hear the comment on what.
What is thorough and efficient? Who defined that? Is it defined?
You had an anecdote about.
Oh, that there's people, and you can go to Allentown, you can go to many school districts where they're graduating. I don't know what they call graduating, but they're going through and they're graduating with like 5th grade reading and math skills. In my eyes, if the state accepts that, that's thorough and efficient. So why do we provide any more than that? Or let's start defining what thorough and efficient is.
Lynn and Julian, do you have a response to his question?
My response to that is, if memory serves, I seem to recall Mr. Ballard saying at some point that that has yet to be legally defined, and it needs to be. I've often wondered, for example, why we don't have a no-strike law in Pennsylvania for teachers. For example, what part of a thorough and efficient system of education allows the educators to strike? Firefighters can't strike, policemen can't strike, and teachers very often like to remind us that they are a public good, just as firefighters are a public good, and just as policemen are a public good. Why is it then that they can hold the taxpayers and, quite frankly, our children hostage by threatening to strike? That's not part of a thorough and efficient system of education, is it?
On that vein, I actually have a question for you, for the both of you. The Pennsylvania School Board Association, which I assume most school boards belong to in the state, if not all, has that...
With the possible exception of Pennsbury now, yes.
Right. My question is, has the PSBA initiated any types of reforms or promoted or lobbied for any of these changes that we're discussing here tonight, as far as a no-strike law, different forms of taxation, some of the other things you brought up? Has the professional organization that all school boards belong to created any kind of initiative to address any of these problems?
The only real reform that I've seen them push for is the prevailing wage reform that we've actually had a resolution that we voted on a meeting or two ago, and that was to their credit. I know they don't support the Stop Teacher Strikes bill as currently proposed, and that has, Chuck, if memory serves, that has to do with the fact that we would then have to have binding arbitration.
Let me just answer the question.
Sure.
It's on the local PSBA liaison board. The state association has a set of legislative priorities, which I believe anybody can see on their website, in about 7 different areas. There's about 10 things in each area that they attempt to state as the position of the association. And they have produced, for instance, a study 2 years ago about trying to create a hybrid pension plan to move from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan. And they put that out and they tried to get legislators to sponsor it. No legislator would sponsor it. They've done other things in those same areas. They have tried to get a law passed where teachers would lose money if they went on strike. That has gotten nowhere. They can propose these things. They try to find a sympathetic legislator to put it into the hopper, and even if it gets into the hopper, it dies in committee. But they have a continuous lobbying effort for a whole raft of sets of issues. You can find those on the website of psba.org.
So if I hear you right, then it would kind of benefit all members of the community to be more active in electing their state legislatures and state senators, as far as finding those who have some kind of a financial spine and are willing to stand up to the opposing forces, the people that want to spend more money?
Whatever you want the legislators to do, you've got to tell them, because if you don't tell them, they will go off and do what some lobbying group is trying to get them to do. And remember, a lot of these lobbying groups are giving the legislators lots of money for their campaigns. And it takes a lot of individual citizen voices calling up the legislator's office and complaining about things to make a difference under those circumstances. Everybody has got to call their legislator and talk to them about their issues.
Not only do we have special interests lobbying the individual legislators, but you have party leadership on both sides, twisting arms and telling them how to vote on specific issues. And they tell them, if you don't vote the way we want on specific issues, and both parties are guilty of this, Sam Smith, the Republican, is just as bad in my eyes as Bill DeWeese, the Democrat, ever was. And they say, don't take a position on this, or we will not help you get reelected. You see here in the special election all this money that's being thrown in by both parties. The Republican Party is putting in $250,000. Last I heard, the Democrats were putting in at least $45,000, but there's probably more than that. And without that money, individual legislators are helpless. There's a gentleman ran up north a little bit, twice for state legislature in a Republican-leaning seat, but he ran on reform-minded conservative issues, and the Republican Party did nothing to help him and let the Democrat win by maybe 4%. If you don't do what the leadership wants, they will put you in a broom closet and they will give you no money for re-election, which means that if you want a legislator who's going to respond to you, you need to find someone who's running for office and work very hard for them. Anyone, no matter what your viewpoint is. Door to door, getting in touch with people directly can beat big money. It's happened before. We saw it in the neighboring district with the 131st, where Karen Beyer, who did pretty much everything that leadership wanted, got defeated by Justin Simmons, who's been much more independent-minded. But he had to work, and he had to have a campaign team that worked.
So what is your suggestion, what would be, either of you can weigh in on this, what would be your suggestion to help to increase citizen involvement at that level so that school districts can get the funding that they need in order to operate properly? What would be your suggestion to the community at large to help better education in the state?
I think we just need more groups like this that you're starting, like citizens groups, to get the word out, to get the to get the facts out, to have meetings and invite people to town halls like this. And as the word spreads, hopefully to get more people involved. And I know it takes a lot of time and effort to learn about it, to read, to have a night open. You know, parents prefer to be home probably helping with their kids and their homework and things like that, their sports events and so forth. It takes a huge dedication and commitment for any citizen to get involved and come to meetings and support. If I could bring the discussion, if you don't mind, back to the local school board, because, you know, we're not going to fix Harrisburg in the next month and a half, and that's really by when the budget needs to be approved by the end of June. So if I'd like to hear from other people that are here. I will say, one question people would ask as well is, you know, in private industry, we just go in and we cut 10% off of every line, or they, you know, your supervisor comes in and says you need to cut 10% from your budget today. And, you know, in private industry, yes, we need to do that. So I'm starting to understand that there are lines that you can't do that too, and that maybe it's these, you know, as hard as it is, there are hard decisions to be made. Sometimes things may need to be cut, or funds to be shifted from, I always like to say, administration to the school kids. I'm, you know, definitely looking at those kinds of areas. And I think, you know, conferences are great and travel is nice, but when push comes to shove and the resources aren't there and you really are trying not to give the taxpayers yet another increase, then unfortunately these are the kinds of things that need to be looked at. And I know how difficult that is. People live it every day. And I think that hopefully, you know, it's nice to have a little bit, but if not everybody, I guess I say it like this, like maybe we're used to going to Europe every year on our vacation, and this year it's either like we're just going to the Jersey Shore, or we may even have to do a staycation, depending on how difficult the changes are. So hopefully that will incite some questions.
Otto?
You know, I heard you say private industry, and I realize in government it's a lot tougher, but in private industry, when times are tough, it's usually you start at the top and you freeze and cut right there. and that sends the message down the line. And I know you don't have to deal with a union when you're dealing with administrators, so.
That's true.
What percentage of the school district budget is spent on administration?
I'm sure we have
Garrett, let me get back to you on that.
Okay. I mean, it would be interesting to find out how much the managerial overhead costs the district. Yes?
And I don't want to sound draconian when I say that, you know, when times are good, that's the time then you reward the individuals who were taking the tough cuts when the times are tough.
If we're just talking about salaries, it's $3,742,579, which is actually a decrease of $5,426 year to year.
Mr. Ballard, you had a comment?
Well, I would just like to point out two things. That there's a $120 million roughly budget, so that's less than 3% is administrative salaries.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that our administrators took freezes, including our top administrators. So that has happened.
Administrative costs have decreased in the last couple budgets, which is partially due to Dr. Seidenberger eliminating a position and consolidating, and he's done a pretty good job with limiting administrative expansion, which heretofore I would have said was a problem.
Yeah, I don't want to dominate here, but I do attend the school board meetings and have been for about 3.5 years now. And I know the issue of directors trying to get information has been contentious for whatever reasons. And I know you've been pushing recently for getting more budgetary information so you can understand. Has the administration provided you now with the information you were asking?
Specifically, I'd asked for a detailed budget for the current year that we're in. And it has many lines to it. I think it's like over 3,000. And I had asked for this even as I was a taxpayer. It was something I couldn't understand how a board could approve a budget if they didn't have all the details. And most people I talked to, agree that makes sense. So when I was on the board, and once I was elected, I asked again, and in time, it was granted, yes. I do have a copy of those details. And what I like is, I was told that whatever I ask for will be shared with everyone on the board. And I'm trusting that whatever somebody else on the board asks for will also be shared, with everybody. So I like that idea.
So I understand you did get what you were asking for.
Yes.
Well, that's good.
Now, can a copy of all these bits of information be posted publicly anywhere for the public to view? Or are there restrictions against that?
As long as it's a public document, I believe that it can be posted. I would double check on that. I know that the preliminary budget for this year has been posted on the School District website, the 2012-13. But it's clearly noted that it's preliminary and it will be changing. But I think it's a great stride for the taxpayer that it is available there.
I'm glad to hear it, because in the last 12 months I've gone to the district offices twice in person to get the information you're describing, that detailed 3,800 line document. And both times I was not responded to for a couple of weeks until I called back a number of times. And then I was told that the information didn't exist. And so I'm delighted to hear that you got it. My question is, can that information then finally be made public so that all citizens of the district have access to it?
I guess we will have to ask if the administration would post it on the website.
But I mean,
which I'm happy to do for you.
Can you, as a citizen and a school board member who is in possession of that information, are you allowed to put that out, say post it on the internet or publish it if you could distribute it, if you would choose to do so, or are you restricted by your position from doing that?
No, we wouldn't be restricted. I think we could do that in due respect to the administration, though I would certainly let them know that I would do that.
Okay. Mr. Rhodes?
I have sort of two questions. How many full-time teachers do we have in the school?
It's between
490 off the top of our heads, but
About 490. What is the gross, how much pay does the school district have to put out to actually pay those 490 teachers as a gross amount, including all fringe benefits and all liaison trips and all sabbaticals and everything else? What does it actually cost as a median income for the whole lot of them?
you're asking several different questions here. What is the median income of a teacher in the East Penn School District? $67,000 a year plus benefits.
And what are
The average cost to the district, a starting salary of a teacher is $80,000.
Wait,
No, not the
salary is not.
No. The average cost total, all in,
What is the cost?
which is the number that you've given out, Chuck.
Starting salary is
You
not.
said salary.
No.
You said salary.
The salary itself is $45,000. The starting cost to the school district is $80,000.
The starting cost to the school district is $80,000. That means the benefits and support package for the salary, including the backside of Social Security and other things, is almost 70 or 80% of the pay. From 35 to 80. I mean,
No,
45 to 80 is $35,000 worth of expenses.
Right. That's not 70 or 80%.
I think we should, if you're going to make that kind of a judgment, you probably want to make sure you have an accurate figure. I think the 80,000.
That's approximate.
I've also heard 70,000. So I think if you want to do a percentage, you might want to make sure you're talking about a starting salary and what the benefits are. But, I mean, the pension obligation this year is 12.5% set by the state. So that's part of that.
Well, the pension is its own problem. It's a whole other basket case. But
We're obligated to
what I'm trying to get a fix on is that if I ran a business for 28 years. It didn't take me but about 2 years to figure out that when I paid someone $8.50 an hour 30 years ago, that I wasn't paying them $8.50. I was paying them $10.50 or $11. By the time I paid Social Security and Blue Cross and vacation and sick and personal days, we didn't have a lot of what I'll call the fine line stuff. We just had the 4 or 5 basic things. And I quickly realized that my actual cost of labor was 20 or 25% higher than I had anything in any budget I had put together. So the question sort of is, how much does it actually cost the district to pay for a full-time teacher as a median level?
So is that something that you'd be willing to try to find out, look through the numbers and get, maybe Dr. Seidenberger would be able to help you with that?
Sure.
Sure.
Yes, Lynn, before you get started, Gio?
Did you say it was just over 60% of the budget was salary and benefits? So if the budget is $120 million, 60% of that is $72 million. At 490 teachers, that comes out to
I
147,000.
think they were talking about all salaries.
Gio?
That's all.
Okay, that's all salaries.
Yeah,
That's all
that
teacher
includes
salaries.
support staff, administrative staff, et cetera.
Okay. So that's just the 60% is just the contracted for everybody.
If they're looking at the line item.
John?
How many people work for the school district? Next question, I guess.
Another one that we probably have to add up to look at. Yeah. Unless someone here knows.
I think that's in that district update document we have, which I don't have with me, of course.
Yeah.
Chuck, do you know off the top of your head?
No. Off the top of my head. I go back to my budget book.
So that's another one we'll find out for next time,
Yeah.
right? Okay,
It's a
good.
good question.
Any other questions? Mr. Duns?
Any contracted labor at all? You know, not part of the school district, subbed out or whatever, you know, it's not actually paid.
There's a nutrition group that does the food, but that's a totally enterprise, you know, totally separate than the budget. It's not part of the budget.
Like the busing or something, that's like a contracted work. Is there anything else besides busing or?
There would be
Services like engineering, legal,
auditor.
architect, if it's not considered part of some project, you'd have contracts for those. And certain special education services, like school psychologists, schools for the deaf, or some of the other things that we have to pay for certain special education students who are actually boarded off the premises. There's little contracts like that, but there's nothing major besides the transportation contract.
You said major, you mean big sum of
Several
money.
$1 million.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing.
Yes,
On the, we'll get to a hot button item, charter schools, cyber charter schools, whatever. You know, is there any hope that funding sources?
can you address the
Reimbursement from the state is actually coming or forthcoming? Or is that cut and dry and dead?
I know that a lot of, you know, citizens and taxpayers have asked that the charter monies be reimbursed for the schools or for the charter. I think it's a pretty active push, you know, for Harrisburg to try to have people have it reimbursed.
Are people pushing for it? Yes. Do I expect it? No.
Well, I guess that's the crux of my question. Is there any indication that
No. And I'm pushing for it too. But I don't, Chuck, if you have any other information, but it doesn't look too likely.
There are more bills that are stuck in committee right now to do that kind of thing. And in fact, we will be discussing a motion to send Harrisburg a proclamation saying that they need to do something about that. Because even the state auditor general has identified that these cyber schools are getting overpaid by the taxpayers for the education that they're providing to students. And it's all coming out of local district funds for the most part. Because we have to fork over I think it's like $8,800, $8,600 per student, $8,800 currently. And we're currently able to do a cyber education with an East Penn diploma for something like $4,000. And it's even worse in other school districts because they may have to pay more than our average cost because their costs are higher. So the same cyber school can be getting widely different payments, all of them bigger than what they should be charging to do this from various school districts. And right now we're currently looking at $3 million of mostly local money because the state only sends us 18%. So 82% of that $3 million is coming out of local taxpayers going to these cyber and charter schools.
And of course, the law said that we may get reimbursed up to 30%. They eliminated that last year entirely, if my memory serves me. And I've suggested to certain legislators that they have it so that it is the full 30% reimbursement. I'm for school choice. I support charter schools. I support parents deciding what school is best for their children, be it public school, be it cyber charter school, be it sending them to 7 Gen. I have no problem with them existing. However, I would like to see a fair funding system for charter schools as I would for school districts. Tom Corbett apparently had some brilliant political sense when he decided to eliminate the charter school reimbursement at the same time he was pushing for more funding for school choice. That's just going to make school districts like us real happy.
Yes, Mr. Bacher.
I would say there are two issues there. One is they're not covering the complete cost of bricks and mortar charter schools, but on the cyber charter schools, they're actually requiring school districts to pay double or more than double than it would cost the school districts to provide the same online education. So it's whatever you feel about choice, I find it hard to believe justification that something that the school district can do for $4,200, we should be required to pay another institution $8,800 to do a worse job at. All the cyber charter schools in the state of Pennsylvania are performing worse on tests than the kids they draw children from. So that means children from the Philadelphia School District that go to a cyber charter school get a worse education. They do worse than the kids that stayed in the Philadelphia School District. Children from the Allentown School District that go to a cyber charter school do worse than the kids that stayed behind in the Allentown School District. So why we're being required to pay double our costs for doing that is just amazing. And it goes back to there's big money in it for people who are making huge sums of money on this. And
Well,
there's no justification for that.
Ken, I'm loath to say that just because they're not performing particularly well, and you've seen the results better than I have, on state-mandated tests that they're getting less of an education. All that indicates to me is that they're not learning whatever's on that test, which I generally oppose, and I've said this throughout my time on the school board, this standardized testing, because it accurately measures nothing. It's just, I would like to see the legislators who mandate these things have to pass the test themselves, and I've said that multiple times.
I want to stop this only because we're kind of getting into whether or not charter schools provide a good education, which really isn't the purpose of the evening.
I wasn't,
and I understand your point.
I wasn't saying charter schools in general.
Right.
I was saying
Cyber charter
schools in specific.
Right.
There's a pro-educational group at Stanford University that studied. They're pro-educational choice.
Right, and I get your point. I was going to clarify that because your remarks were within the realm of what we were discussing, and that is that the cyber charter schools, one could make the argument that they are being overpaid by the taxpayer. So I completely understood that. I saw the conversation going off in a different direction and just kind of wanted to bring the train back onto the rails, so to speak. Otto?
Yeah, well, I think that does have a huge budget impact, as Mr. Blocker just said. But going to another budgetary item, has the school district identified now what its cost, or I should say diminished revenues will be because of the Allentown neighborhood improvement zone? How much revenue are we going to lose?
I don't believe that we've heard that yet. Last I heard, the county was still trying to figure it out. They haven't put out any list to anybody about how much it is for that hockey system. Correct?
I don't think the school district, they get the check, they don't know where the people are working that provide money, so we have to get that information.
We're supposed to be getting it from Allentown, but for some reason they've been unable to provide that information for
To us,
Very interesting.
to us or anyone else.
For anybody, yeah.
But the point is, can you then adequately prepare your budget if you don't know what the revenue loss is going to be?
We will do the best that we can with what we have.
Bill, you had a comment?
Thank you.
Yeah, so you're telling me that you trust Allentown to remit all those earned income taxes back to the school district?
I don't trust anything.
Doesn't anybody audit those numbers? Doesn't anybody go and make sure you're not getting screwed by Allentown?
I don't trust anything that's coming out of this neighborhood improvement zone project, and I certainly don't
But
trust
it doesn't matter.
Allentown.
This is just showing a light on the possibility that we don't have any audits to know that we're getting our fair share of money.
I agree, and there's part of me that thinks that if they're so sure that we're going to get it, then put it up front. You know, just put it up front and then worry about it if we need to pay you back later.
This is either atrocious bookkeeping or someone's hiding something. And I think that the East Penn School District should join the lawsuit and sue them for all the back records and know what's going on, because I think you're going to find hidden money.
Is that something that the board would be willing to entertain?
I guess we would have to ask the board, you know, have to suggest or resolute or resolve and see if they would want to do that. We did already somewhat of a resolution that we were against the way in which it was done.
I don't want to join a lawsuit lawsuit is going to cost us more than the funds that we're trying to get in.
The three municipalities that filed the lawsuit, I believe they're all in the area, and they have reason to believe that they're losing significant funding.
If it looks like joining the lawsuit would be a profitable venture for the district, then I would be all for it. However, I don't want to see us costing the taxpayers more in attorney's fees than we would get back in the funds that we're missing.
So then I have a question in that vein. If 3 municipalities are already suing,
I feel like we're up to about 7 now.
well, however many, let's call it 5 for the sake of the argument.
Sure.
If a group of local municipalities are already suing Allentown to get access to these records or to get an audit or to go find money if there's any to be had, would that information then, once the suit is complete, become public and be available, and therefore the district would be able to benefit from the discovery of that information without having to pay for it?
I don't think the suit is to get the record. The suit
Right.
calls the law unconstitutional.
Right.
Because I guess you're not allowed to pass a law that only applies to one entity. And the wording in the law basically makes Allentown the only city that the law applies to. So they're saying it violates the Constitution of Pennsylvania and it should be struck down.
Okay. And yeah, as I said, I don't, if the law is struck down, then we got our money back and so forth. But I don't want to see us enter a lawsuit that's going to cost us more than we would get back in the funds after we have them returned. It doesn't make sense to me. But yes, we would benefit from it if it succeeds. Yes, John?
John?
This just has to do back again with like the charter school reimbursement funds, I'll say. I'd like a clearer explanation of how that actually works. In my eyes, it seems like when you say reimbursement, it's the money came from the state, went to someplace, and now it's coming back from that someplace. But to me, I think it's really the state's giving this money, it's going somewhere, and the state is giving more money to the first entity before it goes. Do you know how that works?
No, most of the money is from the district. The state only funds a small fraction of the money. So it's mostly money going from the district. So for example, the state funds approximately 20% of the school district. So the charter school payment is about 80% non-state funds and 20% state funds.
And who's giving this reimbursement money? Where's it coming from?
The state is saying, I mean, Chuck would probably know this more. I think when the charter school law was originally filed, there was no reimbursement. And they realized you're basically setting up a new school. And so you're paralleling a lot of your, there has to be a CEO, there has to be HR, there has to be all these administrative functions for the school. So there's more costs involved in doing things twice. And so they realized that the money that a district saves, whatever it may be, is much smaller than the amount of money that goes to the school, that goes to the charter school. And so after the law was passed and they saw the ramifications, they passed this law that says the state can reimburse up to 30% of that. It's still, in my mind, if you look at the numbers, that doesn't cover the school district's costs, expenditure. But that's the law. And then the governor in the most recent budget said the reimbursement is going to be 0, which is up to 30%, so he's not violating the law.
But again, reimbursement, I mean, that's new money that the state came up with to say, okay, we'll help PE, we'll give you more money.
No, I don't believe so. I think the state said you need to take money that you were spending on your school and pay it to this school over here, and we'll pay you back some of your losses.
Who's paying back? Who?
The state. The state that required the payments is saying, we understand that's creates a financial burden. The local taxpayers.
It's sort of a partially funded mandate, if you will.
So you can make your argument if the state only said, we're giving you $2,000 a student. If the state said, okay, we're not going to pay that $2,000 to the school district for that student, we're going to pay it to this charter school, then I agree with you, there wouldn't be a reimbursement of funds. But the state is saying, you not only send that $2,000, that's our money, spend $6,800 of your other money to go along with that. And so that's what the state is reimbursing. The state is saying, we want you to spend the money over here, so we'll cover part of those costs, and they're not.
But the money already, I mean, it costs $8,800 a kid from your school district. The kids go from the school district to the charter school, so the money followed the kid. Now,
But I think there's
less kids in this school, but they went to this one, but where's this? And you get to keep.
Well,
Well,
so
the
I'll
8,800.
say, I mean,
Oh, wait.
in business, there's a fundamental, I mean, I see that argument a lot, but in business, there are fixed costs and variable costs. And the fixed costs remain even if, you know, I'm in manufacturing, we make more widgets, we have a lower average cost the more widgets we make because we have facilities, we have certain fixed costs. The more product we can make with those fixed costs, the lower our average costs. So when you look at something like this, what are the fixed costs? What are the variable costs? Well, if 10 students, I saw we send approximately 120 students. What is the 100, 300? I don't know. On the order of 100 students, 200 students leave us to go to charter schools. We have 12 grades. That's on the order of 10 or 15 students a grade. So when those students leave, we're not firing principals. We're not closing down buildings. We're not we're not spending less on electricity. We actually have to bus those students to a different place, so our transportation costs actually go up. Instead of sending students from one neighborhood to the local elementary school, we're collecting students from all over the district to go to a different school. So some of our costs actually go up. You could make an argument that on average, we have fewer students in a class, and there's some value to that. But if you look at, you know, how many students in a class and how much a teacher costs, that puts the sort of the value of a student leaving somewhere in the $2,500 range. And so if you're talking about your variable costs that are going to go down, it's something in the neighborhood of $2,000 to $3,000. And we're sending $8,800. And most of that difference is extra money that we have to come up with. It's money that the state is pretending doesn't exist. It's a cost that the state is pretending doesn't exist. But it's coming out of, we're having to cut other things to pay for that. And it actually, our per student cost will go up when you take kids out. I think that's just the facts of how the accounting works.
Does that answer your question, John?
Not completely, because the
Okay.
overhead still stays.
Gio, did you want to weigh in on this?
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. The overhead expenses still stay.
Yeah.
And so what if our overhead expenses are, you know,
I think John's original question wasn't necessarily in how the money got spent. I think it was a question of, is the state double tapping payment, basically? Are they paying schools twice?
No, I think the fallacy comes into when you talk about average cost. When you take the total amount and divide it by the number of students, you can get an average cost. But there's a fallacy saying that that's how much it costs. And the easy way to look at that is, what if you had a student with one person in it? One student. Do you think you could run a school for $8,800 teaching one student? No. You have, you know,
The question-
obviously you couldn't pay your rent even.
Gio, do you want to
Well,
weigh in on this?
what does it cost the East Penn taxpayers to educate a student in East Penn?
So the instructional costs are what we're talking about, $8,800.
No, that's the charter school. What does it cost?
That's what it's based
Gio,
on.
I think what you're asking is how much money does the district spend per student?
That is the
Like-
amount.
So that's what we're talking
So-
about.
So if we took the $120 million budget and we divided it by the number of students we have, it would come out to $8,800?
No, because there are special education students, which cost more, you have to take them out. There are other things that are removed that are non-instructional costs.
I think Gio is looking for an overall average. I think what he wants
Yes.
to know
And
is
so
if
that's-
you take $120 million and divide it by the student population of the district, what's the number?
It's higher than that, but that's, I
Does
don't think
anybody
that's
know
the-
what that number is?
I don't think,
16,000.
It's 16,000?
no, it's
Yeah.
close to 14,000.
Yeah.
So let's call it 14,000, okay?
So wouldn't it save the taxpayer about $5,000 a student if we just sent all the kids to charter schools?
I think that's the fallacy, that's what I was trying to explain. That 14,000 includes transportation, which the school district is still obligated to pay.
Right, and that's, I believe,
It includes-
700 a student, so.
There are-
Not for
No.
a private student, it's about twice the cost.
Even at 1,400,
So
even at 1,400, you're looking at just over
the number you're looking for,
$10,000.
the apples to apples comparison, the charter school funding law says these costs, and I think the major one is probably debt service, and transportation is removed. You take those costs out and then divide the total that's left by the number of students, and that's where the 8,800 comes from. It's the instructional costs. It's all the administrative overhead, it's the electricity, it's all the things needed to run the school, other than buying new school buildings and transporting students.
Lynn and Julian, do you want to weigh in on this?
Well, I just know when the charter, I know the public charter, when they get the 8,800, then they're also have all those expenses as well as instructing the students. So they're renting their building and so forth and so on.
That's the
So
whole
they're-
point that there are, and I think there are some things that the charter school does less expensively than the school district, but there are some things that the school district does from economies of scale that make it cheaper than the charter school. And I think the whole argument that, I'm not saying that the local charter school is wasting money. I think they're cash strapped. I think they're having difficulty getting by. But that's the fundamental issue here, is that the state is pretending there are no additional costs from taking these students and educating them in this other school.
Gio?
How many
For
students are there?
example, excuse me,
Gio?
I'm in the middle of explaining something.
Been quite a bit of time.
The charter school is approximately the size of an elementary school, but it also has to have HR, it has to have other things. I'm agreeing, there are these overhead costs, and you're pretending they don't exist. The state is pretending they don't exist because it's not funding.
You wanted to weigh in?
7,973.
7,973 is which number, Julian?
How many students we have?
Okay. And Gio, your question was?
That's what I.
Okay. So essentially then, and correct me if I'm mistaken, if the state gives a school, not necessarily ours, $10,000 for a student, does that money goes to the district?
No,
If that
the state
student,
doesn't give
that's why I'm going to ask the basic question. Who gets the $10,000? If that student then goes to a charter school, what's the flow of the money?
From the school
Mr.
district.
Ballard?
Charter school.
Well, it's kind of difficult because like anything else done by a government committee, it's, you know, a camel is a mouse designed by a government committee. Okay? There's something called average daily membership because schools do not stay constant through the year. The 7937, I think is what you said, Julia.
73, I think.
Is a snapshot at one time. We have monthly reports of what the school population is. The state computes an average throughout the year called the average daily membership based on what you had monthly on reports and comes up with this number. And they provide basic education subsidy based on the average daily membership, not on what you currently have at any given time, but some average taken from the last year. And so the basic education subsidy that we get currently is around $2,800 from the state. That's your 18 to 20% per student for the average, for the regular education student. Special ed is a whole different bang. Okay, so it's really difficult to get your hand on these numbers exactly because of all these.
So does the state send the $2,800 to the district or the charter school?
To the district.
And then the district gives how much to the charter school?
Right now, we're giving about $8,800.
Okay, so essentially the district is now down $6,000.
Yes, from
Then how is the district then remunerated some or all of that $6,000?
We can't.
So you literally eat the
It
$6,000.
comes out of the real estate tax.
Well, it comes out of all of our
It comes
taxes.
out of
There
their
are
funds.
three main taxes we get, okay? There's
Yep.
an earned income tax, a property tax, and a real estate transfer tax. There's some minor things also, but those are the main things, okay? Real estate tax in our district is approximately 60% of our revenue.
Property.
Property tax, property tax is 60% of our revenue. The 40% is earned income tax and real estate transfer tax.
So of that,
88.6%, Chuck.
what?
88.6% is the property taxes, not 60.
88.6% of the local.
Yeah.
So that local is about 80%.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that- I'll agree,
88
yeah.
times 80% is about 60-something%.
Yeah, I agree.
So basically,
Jill,
so
is
from
it
my
clear?
understanding of following the flow of money, is that the state portion of the payment, the money that comes from Harrisburg, is $2,800.
Yeah.
So essentially then, the taxpayers of the district, through either property tax or some other taxing revenue, then pays that $6,000 to the charter school. So in effect, a new charter, and I'm talking about a brick and mortar charter school. A brick and mortar charter school then in effect does add to the cost of the tax base to the tune of $6,000 per student. Keeping things in a basic understanding.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Gio?
I just want to make sure I get this right. So if they base it off of taking the budget and subtracting debt and transportation?
There's a couple of other things. It's all non-instructional costs as defined under the state budgetary codes. Essentially, only thing that is used to calculate the charter school payment is instructional costs. So buildings, building maintenance, transportation, anything that doesn't directly instruct a student is subtracted from that $8,800.
But administration, though, is included in that.
So,
Chuck, that would be the same as the instructional cost in our expenditures line item?
I think it is, but I'd have to
Then that would be 68,314,108. $68,314,108.
if I just take the debt and the transportation away from the budget, it works out to $12,291 per student.
But there are other things, obviously, if that's.
all of the building costs, all of the debt service and all of that is associated with non-instructional costs.
Right.
So all of those costs come on. The numbers right now is $8,800.
Right, but the $8,800 to the charter school covers all of the,
Doesn't cover transportation.
it doesn't cover transportation, but it does cover the bricks and mortars, it covers whatever debt service they have, whatever administration. So in essence, they're doing everything but the transportation for $8,800 per student.
Plus whatever they can raise themselves.
And there are also special education. If they have any special education students, they get $17,000.
Per student instead of the 88. It's not double.
Instead of,
70
yes.
instead of, okay.
I'm hearing these calculations going back and forth, but I didn't hear anybody say anything about the costs of athletic programs and how that's factored in.
If you want to bring up athletic programs, we'll do that as soon as you had some remarks.
Yeah, just as we're drawing a little bit close to 8:30 here, I just wanted to make
10-minute warning.
I wanted to make an observation. All over the state, PSCA and groups like them are setting up sessions with the local concerned citizens groups, though not necessarily the same as the concerned taxpayers groups. And they're getting turnout of several hundred. I spoke at the Scranton Tea Party event over the weekend, which was held the day after one of these rallies. At that particular rally, not the Tea Party, the rah rah give us more money rally beforehand, but there were several hundred people. At the Tea Party that I spoke with, the essentially we don't want more money crowd, there were 25. Note the amount of people that we have here today. There's going to be about 2 weeks from now, is that event? Next week?
What's the event?
There's an event with the East Penn the East Penn Invested Citizens are hosting it, but there's some PSVA and teachers unions types speaking next Wednesday, is it? And their byline apparently is that we're getting less money from the state. You've seen this invite, I have not. You said that they were... Right, but they're telling people that they're getting less money from the state?
Could you...
I had attended one earlier, I know Mr. Ballard was there, they had a number of speakers and some legislatures and so forth, but that is the mantra that the state has cut education funding.
But we're budgeting for an increase this year by 1,090,000 figure? Yes, John?
But what is the bulk of that? It's increased payment for teacher social security and pension.
I know, but we're still getting an increase.
Well, and we're also getting an increased bill for the district's portion of Social Security and pension that the state is not funding, although it's requiring us to pay. So I think if you just look at that, it's a decrease. Just look at
Is
pension
the gross
payments.
amount of money given to the district by the state gone up or down?
The gross amount of money has gone up,
Okay.
but it's gone
So-
up to pay for things that the state requires.
Oh, I understand that, and I'm not arguing that
Right.
point. I understand that the district has been saddled with extra costs that go with it.
Yes.
But the gross amount of money being given to the district has in
Yes,
fact
I don't think-
increased.
I don't think any.
They're just obligated to spend more than the increase.
Yes.
Right.
You gotta look at that two ways though. There's another decrease that comes on there because last year Governor Corbett pulled out educational block grants that were providing for things like tutoring and early childhood education and so forth. The legislature put back $100 million of that. This year, he's pulled the rug out from under it again, and so far, although the legislature is talking about putting that money back in again, it's an overall cut right now of $100 million.
And you said they were block grants for what items?
Things like early education, special tutoring, after-school programs, there's a whole raft of
Now,
different
are
things.
any of those items mandated by the state? Are we required to provide after-school programs? Are we required to provide tutoring? Are we required to provide before
I think he
school?
was commenting more on this is money that's decreased from this year compared to.
Right, but if we didn't engage in those activities, then we wouldn't be eligible for those grants anyway. Is that correct? I'm asking because I don't know.
Yeah.
And this is another part of we need to define thorough and efficient.
In this district, we don't offer early childhood education. We only offer full-day kindergarten for some disadvantaged students. That would have gone for them, and also the tutoring. In some way, you look at it, the tutoring is kind of mandated, not saying you must provide tutoring, but by requiring all the students to pass these tests that they have to demonstrate proficiency in. If you have a student that needs extra help, you need to tutor them in order for them to pass this test and be successful. So it's kind of a backhanded mandate.
It's a catch-22. In other words, technically, you're not legally required to provide it. But for all intents and purposes, you're really kind of have to.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Now, Otto, you wanted to bring up athletic programs?
Well, I just...
We're down to 5 minutes.
I heard of the triangular conversation here about, mandates and, how we were calculating the costs of the education, but I didn't hear anybody factor in where the the athletic costs were coming from. And again, I just threw that question out there. What is that figure, and how is that factored into your equations?
Is that considered an instructional cost?
No.
No, it's not.
Okay,
Okay.
so that's not in the 68 million number?
No.
But it's also as a percentage of the budget.
The question is not meant to be pro or anti.
No.
Right, you're just wondering
I just wanna know
how it's
factored
accounted
in.
for, exactly.
It's in that detailed line budget that we do have, but I don't have the number off the top of my head. But we could figure out the athletic costs, yeah.
Generally less than 1% of the budget.
Yeah.
I'm going to say a little less than $1 million.
Chuck, I can remember coming to a meeting before I was on the board, heck, before I was old enough to vote, and you guys talking about someone from the public had asked, you know, what happens if you would cut the entire education budget, and it was something, or not education, the entire athletics budget, and it was something like $600,000 at the time. So if it's still under $1 million, we've done a pretty good job of keeping that under control.
Any
But
final?
when things come push to shove, it is one of the areas that does have to be looked at.
John?
Are there any plans or ideas on how to create more revenue? Somehow?
That's a good one. Do you have any ideas on that?
Well, we have one.
Yeah, well, I'll go in order. I'll allow each director a chance to respond. Start with Lynn.
A huge one is
Lynn? I promise I will get to you. You have my word.
One idea is to have the students pay to park. This was brought up last year as a proposal, and it costs about $450 or $480 per student for busing. And if the student's not going to be on the bus, if there were a way to have them waive that and pay, 50 cents a day or $1 a day. I don't have a number, but it would be a revenue, maybe about $25,000. But it's something if you needed to have something.
Julie?
That actually was also going to be my suggestion for increasing revenue. The only increased cost, by the way, that I would immediately recommend is I would still like to see us webcast board meetings in-house, having the district do it, although I do very much appreciate the service that Mr. Donchez has provided by posting these videos on the website. I think that it's time that the school district get with the times, for lack of a better way of putting it. And the first year's cost of memory service would be something like $5,000, and I think that we can find room for that somewhere in the budget.
Okay, but Mr. Donchez had asked about ideas on revenue.
Right, and my comment would have been the same as Ms. Donchez, because it's something that we had talked about. I proposed this, or that we look at this last go-around, last budget cycle. Nothing ever came of it. Would it be a lot? No. Would it be something? Yes.
Mr. Bacher?
I think the big one is addressing the cyber charter funding issue. If we could, regardless of what you think about the quality of the education,
We're not talking about
charter,
performance, right?
if you restricted their reimbursement for what the school district what the school district pays for an online education that results in an East Penn diploma, you could save the school district approximately, I think it's over $800,000 every year at the current numbers. So $800,000 every year just addressing the cyber charter funding. And that doesn't require any tax increases to come up with that revenue. That's just money not going to someone's pocket, it's going to education.
But correct me if I'm wrong, that's not something that we can do, that's something that the state has to do.
Yes.
But we can create public
We can create a buzz and
concern
get
so
our
that if
legislators
enough
to listen.
people.
I don't-
Right, well, if we're talking about something that the state could do, I would propose that we that the state provide us with the ability to levy impact fees on developers who bring these developments like we have in Lower Macungie Township, where they're paying $4,000 or $5,000 in property taxes, and as you heard, it costs $8,000 plus to educate the student. It really costs more than that, but let's go with the $8,000 figure. They're paying half of what they're using in services at a minimum, assuming they don't have 2 children in the district.
I think along those lines, a big line item we talked about in the budget is the debt. And I think we can find a way, maybe every other house gets, I don't know what it is, as the actual impact, but the operating costs are more manageable. It's the new schools that come along. Those don't come out, you don't pay for them at all out of the tax base that you raise. You have to create debt to.
If we didn't have, I was just agreeing with him here. If we didn't have, kind of giving them the amen chorus here. If we didn't have the $14, $15 million debt payment, we'd be in a lot better shape financially, and the impact fees would go a long way towards paying that down.
I agree with you.
Mr. Ballard, did you have anything to add in that regard as far as sources of revenue?
Well, there are certain things that we've been looking at, but some of them are very complicated to do in a public sector setting. Whenever you have things that bring in revenue, you have these possible commercial entanglements, and also there's a lot of people who don't like commercial entanglements with schools, so you have to go carefully. A school foundation is one of the things that we've been looking at, where corporations could make tax-deductible donations to help support programs. And that would, Parkland has just put one into effect, and we're starting to look at it. But again, you've got to go very carefully, because there's a legal morass that you have to step into to make sure that it's totally separate from the public school system. Only so many directors from the board can be on the board of directors, if at all. There's all kinds of separations, and you can't guarantee that they're going to fund exactly what you want, so you have to be very careful about all that stuff. But a public foundation is one. We don't own the buses, so we probably can't do anything about bus advertising like Parkland is trying to do. But believe me that we're trying to look at anything that would enhance our revenue and not disrupt the educational program.
Okay, great. Well, with that, unless somebody has a quick question, I'm going to end the evening. Yes, what's...
I want to ask a question. School district got to provide transportation for every student, right?
Not exactly. The state law is that if we do provide transportation, we have to provide it not only for our students, but also every non-public school student within the district. The only students we are mandated by law to provide transportation to are special education students. So, as a convenience right now, because it's been that way for decades, we provide transportation to every student in the district. But we're not mandated by law to do that.
Well, we're mandated to put a parking lot in, to park their car, the $100,000 car that they drive every day, and not ride the bus.
From a practical standpoint, the borough of Emmaus has zoning regulations that say if you're going to have any building that's commercial, schools are considered in that sense commercial, you have to provide a certain amount of parking. Like all the teachers are going to have parking anyway. So it's common sense to put in a parking lot, but
it's mandated by building code. You have to.
By building code. So we have to have a certain size no matter what. There are a lot of other concerns that you involve with talking about students parking. I can't control what parents buy for their kids. I never had a car in high school, so I'm not in that category, so I don't know what the thing is. But yes, I understand that problem, but that's the way it is. Whether it's a jalopy or a Lexus, it still has to park somewhere. Well, we pay the bus company by bus and mileage, and unless somebody physically waives the transportation, they have to sign a form. legally to waive the transportation. The bus route has to go past every student's place
In a
of
certain
living,
amount
okay?
of space.
So unless there's one stop that somehow cuts out a quarter of a mile off the bus route, even losing a student doesn't necessarily cut down the number of miles that the bus runs.
Right.
And believe me, we're looking at every possibility involved with minimizing our bus runs. But again, it gets down to, if you offer transportation, you got to offer it across the board to everybody, including non-public school students. We bus St. Anne students, we bus seventh generation students, and these are all routes that take longer than our current routes to go to our schools.
Yes, Bill.
So if you didn't, I understand you're mandated to provide special education transport, or you're required by law. So what if you did not have any transportation, offered no other transportation, and required the parents to pay contract with the bus company a per student fee?
That hasn't been tested in Pennsylvania law yet, because again, it's the school district could not be the one telling parents that they had to go to some private transportation company. Some private transportation company could offer that service, but it would not be something that the school district's doing. We either bus or we don't.
That's my point. Open up to private competition and allow parents to find their own transportation. They can contract with the bus company for a student if they want, or Beaver Bus for all I care. They're paying for it. Let them pay for what they want.
Again, that's a sensitive subject, but there's a lot of people who depend on the transportation who would disagree with you on that particular thing.
Well, they're paying for it one way or another. Why don't they have a competitive thing where they get to pick their transportation?
Again, transportation is one of the few places in the budget that could be cut. And believe me, we will be looking at that the way the governor's budgets are going.
Thank you very much. I'm going to call it a meeting to order. I would like to first thank Lynn Donchez, Julian Stokes, and also Ken Bacher and Charles Ballard for joining us this evening. Had I known you were coming, I would have had a bigger table. I'd be glad to have you up here. If we have anything like this again, please let us know if other school board members are going to participate. We'd love to give everyone an equal chance at participating. So I hope those of you that are here got something out of tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again at our next event. Have a good night.